Let her go, now.
Get your dirty hands off me. You think you can take things from us, huh? You folks never change. That noise stopped everyone in the restaurant in their tracks. It bounced off the marble floors of Magnolia Grove, one of Charleston's most expensive restaurants. There, great wine costs more than a week's rent, and smiles are just part of the service uniform. But that afternoon, the illusion fell apart. Zariah Lane, a young black waitress with skin the color of warm chestnut and a grin that generally made the room brighter, was being pulled by her arm across the dining hall, past the tables of diners who were gazing, all the way to the bathroom. Her voice shook, yet it was still sharp and proud. Her white shirt was crumpled. Blake Calloway, the restaurant manager, was the one holding her wrist. He was white, in his 42nds, and always smelled like cheap powder and expensive cologne. And his remarks were as sharp as glass. Everyone was watching them. Every fork froze in the air. No one, however, moved. Nobody said a thing. One man, though. Idris Camden, a self-made black billionaire and founder of Camden Innovations, sat quietly at a corner table in a navy suit. He was just another well-dressed person in the room. But to fate, he was the storm that would transform everything. Zariah's voice cracked as she tried to explain. "I didn't take anything." "Stop it," Blake said. "You girls constantly find a way to act like a victim." Idris stood up then. Everyone in the restaurant stopped talking. Just being there changed the air, which was serene but heavy. He put his napkin down, turned to Blake, and said, "Maybe it's time for someone to be a hero." The room was full of tension, the kind that makes your pulse beat faster than words. Phones began to record. Someone said, "This is a black story that won't end the way they think it will." And they were correct. That moment, the painful, humiliating, unforgettable moment, was the spark that started a national discourse about dignity, power, and what it really means to stand up when everyone else turns away. You're watching Hidden Worth, where we find out the stories that were never supposed to be kept secret. Stay with us. This one will take your breath away. Zariah Lane didn't want to be different. She just wanted to be kind to clients, get paid, and save every extra dollar for her one basic dream, to go to culinary school. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. In a place like Charleston, where the streets are made of cobblestones and the diners are old money, that fantasy felt like walking up a hill in heels on a rainy day. Zariah wasn't showy. She wasn't rich. She grew up on the north side of town with her grandmother, Miss Eunice, in a 2-bedroom house where love was always there but money was always tight. They didn't have a lot, but they were proud. The kind that doesn't let you take shortcuts or stay quiet when something's wrong. Zariah stood in front of the bathroom mirror every morning to smooth out her uniform, tie her hair back into a nice puff, and tell herself, "Smile with your eyes. Baby. Make 'em see your light," Miss Eunice often advised. And people did saw it. Her coworkers would agree that she worked harder than anybody else. She was never late, always covered shifts, and could remember regulars' orders like clockwork. People who bought from her also noticed her. Some people smiled back. Some did, but not all. When they noticed her coming, some people choose a different table. One person even wrote a letter that said, "You're too pretty to be serving. Should be modeling." She kept it. Not because it was nice, but because it made her remember how low expectations were for girls who looked like her. And then there were the comments that weren't just nice things. "She has that kind of attitude. Could you send someone else over? Does she even know how to speak English?" Zariah grinned anyhow, not because she didn't see it, but because she needed to keep her job. The rent would not wait for justice. A smile, even a phony one, made tips better. But in her heart, she wanted more than merely getting through shifts. She wanted to operate her own business one day, a small cafe with jazz music playing in the background, walls covered in black art, and cuisine that tasted like grandma's on a Sunday. A location where no one cared what hue her skin was. A place where someone like Blake Calloway could never speak up without getting in trouble. Zariah's dream wasn't only about eating, it was about respect, about making something beautiful in a world that told her too frequently that she wasn't good enough. And she hung on to that dream with all her might, even when it seemed like the world was attempting to take it away from her. Blake Calloway didn't need to yell to get his point across. At first, his racism was hard to see, the kind that enables him deny it all when asked, hiding behind fake smiles and performance ratings. But Zariah and everyone else who was paying attentively could see the trend. It all started with the tiny things. She would see that her name wasn't on the weekend schedule, even though she was one of the most popular servers. Blake would answer, "Just rotating shifts, sweetheart," when she asked about it. Nothing personal. But the newer white servers always got longer hours and better tables. Next followed the side comments. "Zariah, smile more. When you're serious, you seem scary." Or, "Don't use too much slang. Customers prefer it to be sophisticated." She once heard him make a joke with another manager and laugh. "She has the hips for waitressing. I'll give her that. But that way of thinking, she'll get tired of it quickly." Zariah kept her head down and worked hard. But when she trained a new white girl who could barely get through the menu and that girl was promoted to floor lead within 2 weeks, Zariah finally asked why. Blake didn't think twice. "She just fits the picture we have in mind. Zariah, you're fantastic, but you know how important looks are." That words kept going through her thoughts for days. Looks matter. What did that mean, exactly? Her uniform was usually clean. She has the right stance. She spoke in a professional way. But her skin, well, it didn't fit their brand. And things just got worse. He would put her on the back patio on cold nights or scorching afternoons, knowing that the tips were terrible out there. He would write her up for things that other servers did all the time, such forgetting to replenish water, not smiling enough, or being too direct. She told someone about it after a drunk customer hit her on the hip one night. Blake shrugged his shoulders. "Guys can be touchy sometimes. It's part of the job. Just brush it off." She didn't ignore it. Not this time. She kept her ground. But they sent her home early because they said she was too emotional. That was Blake Calloway. Not only was he a lousy boss, but he also used his power to tell Zariah in 100 tiny ways that she didn't belong. That no matter how hard she worked, she would always be just one mistake away from being thrown away. And the day he pulled her across that dining room, he did one. Because someone with power was watching. Idris Camden didn't like making a scene. He had established an empire not by yelling, but by watching, learning, and knowing when to say the perfect thing. That's how a youngster from Newark's slums became the CEO of a tech business worth more than $12 billion. He believed in timing, exactness, discipline. But as he watched Zariah being dragged by her wrist across the restaurant floor, her dignity being yanked behind her like it was worthless baggage, something moved in him. He knew what that look on her face meant. He had worn it before, years ago, in a boardroom full of guys who thought success only came in one color. He waited at first. He saw Blake pull the bathroom door open and throw allegations like they were napkins. He heard someone say, "You people always think you can get away with it." He heard Zariah's voice break when she said, "I didn't take anything. I swear." No one moved though, not one customer, not one coworker. So he got up. Idris didn't speak loudly. He didn't have to. He just went toward them slowly and steadily, with a sharp suit and an even sharper look. His voice sounded serene, like water that hasn't moved in a long time. He murmured, "Let her go," and kept his eyes on Blake. Blake chuckled to himself. "Sir, this isn't your business. Go back to your seat." Idris, on the other hand, didn't move. He pulled a smooth, embossed business card out of his coat pocket and put it on the hostess stand next to them. New things in Camden. Idris A. Camden is the founder and CEO. Blake blinked and then looked again. His face lost all its color. And just like that, the situation changed. Idris added, "I've built restaurants. I've put money into more than 50 food businesses. And I've never seen a manager treat an employee like Way without hiding something." Zariah stood still. She wasn't used to people standing up for her. Not like this. Not by someone who didn't expect anything in return. People started to whisper. The phones began to record. Blake gulped. "She stole tips. I think I have a reason." "Do you have any proof?" Idris inquired. "Shut up." Idris went on. "You're making a young black woman look bad in front of everyone. based on nothing but your gut feeling. That's not how to manage. That's profiling. It used to be a restaurant with peaceful jazz and clinking forks, but now it felt like a courthouse. Zariah looked about. She wasn't alone for the first time in a long time. And for Blake Calloway, the quiet witness had just become the most important person in the room. When Idris spoke, the whole mood in Magnolia Grove altered. It was no longer just a fancy restaurant. It became a stage with a spotlight on years of bad behavior. Now the truth couldn't hide anywhere. Blake Calloway was open about what he did and what he didn't say. And Zariah, who was standing next to Idris, was no longer merely a waitress. She was a sign. Idris responded in a calm, chilly voice that was not angry. "Tell me again what made you so sure she stole those tips?" Blake moved about uneasily. It's been said before. Her part usually falls short." "By whom?" Idris pushed. "Other servers? You? Or are they simply your own ideas?" He didn't give them time to answer. Idris turned so everyone in the restaurant could hear him and stated, "Let me be clear. This is what racial profiling looks like. Someone said a black employee did something wrong without any proof. A white manager pulling her through a busy dining room. Instead of talking to someone in secret, they humiliate them in public. Judgment before investigation." Zariah's chest felt tight, but not because she was scared. She felt validated. She wasn't crazy. She didn't go too far. It was going on. And now, someone in charge was saying what it was. People started to move around in their chairs. Some people don't like it. Some people are to blame. Some people were shocked to learn that the man they thought was a nobody in a suit was actually one of the most powerful black business executives in the country. A couple on the other side of the room set down their forks. A teenage waiter who was standing near the drink station took out his phone to record. "Do you know how often this happens?" Idris asked the room. Every day. At eateries, workplaces, schools, different criteria for black workers. Being punished for things that other people do not, and no one says anything." He turned to Zariah. "Until someone does." She pushed back the tears that were welling up in her eyes. Not because she wanted to seem strong, but because this wasn't sadness. This was strength. The kind that happens when the truth is finally said out loud. Idris looked back at Blake. "You need to say you're sorry. In public. Right here. Right now." Blake opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And in that silence, raw, unmistakable, and public, the truth rang out louder than any apology ever could. It wasn't only about Zariah, though. This was about all the small wrongs that had been kept hidden. And finally, someone had spoken it out loud. The next morning, the front of Magnolia Grove didn't smell like biscuits and rosemary butter. It smelled like cameras. The curb was lined with parked news vans. Reporters were gathered around the front door. There were already a lot of people there, some with placards and some just watching. Inside the diner, the tension was like heat coming off the asphalt. Word got around quickly. The video showed Zariah being dragged across the dining room, Idris Camden calmly stepping in, and Blake Calloway stammering in front of a billionaire went viral before midnight. By breakfast, the video had been watched more than 6 million times. What about Idris? He hadn't talked to the press at all, not yet. But what he did spoke volumes. By noon, Camden Innovations had put out an official statement condemning how Zariah Lane was treated, calling it a textbook case of racial bias in the workplace. They promised to fully support Zariah in court and said they would look into discriminatory practices at Magnolia Grove and its parent company. Blake Calloway was put on leave, but they didn't fire him, not yet. The remainder of the workers inside the restaurant tried to seem like nothing had happened, by smiling, pouring water, and cleaning up. But nothing seemed right anymore. The regulars weren't chatting about the meat. They were discussing about the plot, and the servers were on edge, not knowing who would be next in the limelight. That day, Zariah didn't come. She wasn't prepared. She needed some room. But she watched the video over and again from her apartment, her hands shaking and her heart full of questions. Why now? Why did someone finally get up? And what was she expected to do with all this attention she didn't want? She got a call that afternoon. Not from a lawyer, not from HR. From Idris himself. He said, "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." She thought about it. I don't really know. It seemed like everything blew up. Idris said, You didn't start the explosion. You just happened to be standing next to the match, but now the fire's out and people are watching what sprouts from the ashes. An unidentified source revealed internal emails from Magnolia Grove's management team later that night. The emails showed years of neglected complaints, racist language, and a clear culture of bigotry. The receipts were open to the public. There was an immediate backlash. It wasn't just about one manager anymore. It was about a system. And the storm had just started. Zariah Lane had never been the center of attention before. She didn't want to be in the spotlight. She never wanted to be famous. She just wanted to serve with respect. Maybe one day she would operate a small cafe where people might feel at home. But now, people were talking about her name. People who worked for the news knocked on her door. People she didn't know sent her messages, some of which were nice and some of which were harsh. Within the same hour, others had labeled her bold, theatrical, inspiring, and even dangerous. In the middle of everything, her phone buzzed again. Idris was the one. 2 days later, they met in a quiet corner table at a neighborhood breakfast place. There were no cameras or reporters, just two people trying to figure out what had happened. Zariah replied, I don't want to be a symbol, as she stirred her coffee. I only wanted to work, pay my bills, keep my head down. Idris said, I get it. But sometimes life knows you're ready before you do. He took out a folder that was black, sleek, and professional. There was an offer within. A full scholarship to the Camden Culinary Institute, a chance to learn from award-winning chefs, and a leadership role at one of his restaurants that she could start right after she graduates. It was just what she had hoped for. It looked great on paper. But Zariah's eyes didn't light up. She leaned back and said in a low voice, Is this because I earned it or because I went viral? Idris gently nodded, as if he had known the inquiry was coming. Both, he said. You earned it long before I ever met you. But sometimes, the world doesn't notice folks like us until something loud happens. Zariah stared out the window. A boy and his mom passed past, and the boy had a toy spatula in his hand. He waved at her through the window. This time, she really grinned. She thought about her grandma, about every 2 shifts. She put her pride aside every second to be alive. She then looked at Idris. I'll do it, she said, but not because I'm lucky, because I'm ready. He grinned. No one is giving you anything, Zariah. You're finally being noticed. Zariah Lane made her choice at that time, even if her future was uncertain and her spirit was strong. Not to be saved, but to get up. Zariah sat on the floor of her flat that night with her legs crossed and her back against the couch. The only sound was the fridge's gentle hum. Her phone buzzed every few minutes, but she didn't pay attention. She didn't want to discuss yet. Not yet. There was a box in front of her. It was old, had worn edges, and had been taped shut too many times. She hadn't opened it in a long time, not since high school. She took off the cover, one flap at a time. There were things from her past inside. A crumpled program from her 8th grade spelling bee, where she made it to the finals but was admonished by a teacher that she spoke too street for academic events. A picture from her sophomore year yearbook, when she wasn't listed under her real name. A printout of a complaint she made at her first job, where a manager chuckled and said, Honey, if you smile enough, racism isn't real. Zariah held that piece of paper for a long time. She remembered every second. The times people followed her around in department stores, the interviews where they never phoned back after meeting her in person, the replacement instructor who always called her girl instead of her name, the middle school boy who said to her, You're pretty for a black girl. It wasn't simply the loud bigotry that bothered her. It was the kind that was quiet. The looks, what people said, the way people expected less from her and were astonished when she talked clearly, walked boldly, or dreamed more than they believed she should. Miss Eunice, her grandmother, used to call it the soft shadow. That's how racism sneaks into homes without making a sound. Zariah wiped a tear from her face. She called her grandma on the phone. Baby girl, Miss Eunice said in a kind voice. Are you okay? Zariah murmured. I don't know. Things are moving so quickly. I keep thinking about all the things I didn't do. Everything that made me grin. What if I don't deserve this time? For a moment, Miss Eunice was quiet. Then she said, Zariah, you've been eating fire for years. It didn't hurt just because you didn't shout. You deserve this. Every single step. And just like that, Zariah's mind calmed down. Not all cuts and scrapes bleed on the outside. Some of them just sit there silently until you ultimately decide to stop carrying them alone. The room felt smaller when Zariah came back into Magnolia Grove for the first time since the event. Not in a bodily way, but in an emotional way. Everything that used to seem far away was now full with hidden tension. People stopped talking, forks stopped in the air. But she walked erect, with her head up and her uniform clean. She wasn't there to get anything back. She was there to say her goodbyes. Some of the staff smiled softly and nodded carefully when they saw her. A few said they were sorry in a hushed way. One of them mumbled, I'm sorry I didn't say anything. I froze. I should have said something, another person said, looking down. You didn't deserve that. Zariah graciously accepted the apology, not because she wanted them to feel guilty, but because she wanted to be at peace. But not everyone was as kind. A hostess said just loud enough for her to hear, I guess it pays to cry in front of rich people. When she walked by, a line cook rolled his eyes. Have fun with your free ride, princess. Zariah came to a standstill. Not to fight, not to defend, but to take a breath. She remembered something Idris told her. People will either learn from you or resent that you became what they were too scared to fight for. Blake Calloway, on the other hand, had engaged a lawyer and was threatening to suit for wrongful termination. He told the press that he was the victim of cancel culture and a coordinated media takedown. He said that race had nothing to do with it and that he was just doing his job. But the receipt said something else. The emails, the timetables for shifts, the statements from ex-employees, as well as others who came forward after Zariah's tail broke. He didn't make a mistake with how he acted. There was a system. And that system was falling apart. The owner of the restaurant, who was desperate to save the business, made diversity training essential. They promised to reform their policies. There was an apology on the website for everyone to see. But Zariah realized that genuine change doesn't happen in press releases. People see it when they look in the mirror. She walked to the manager's office, the same room Blake used to make fun of her before she left that day. She stood in the doorway and told the new temporary manager, make sure the next Zariah doesn't need a billionaire to be heard. She left after that. Not angry, not broken, but not as quiet as stillness. It didn't feel like a school at Camden Culinary Institute. It seemed like a second opportunity wrapped in steel and the smell of fresh herbs. Zariah walked through the glass doors on her first day with a chef's knife set draped over her shoulder like armor and butterflies in her stomach. The structure was sleek, modern, and full of movement. Students were cutting, flames were flashing under sauté pans, and teachers were yelling commands like generals in a 5-star army. And she fit in there. She didn't believe it at first. She was waiting for someone to ask her if she was lost, or if she was simply there to clean. It's hard for old scars to go away, but no one asked her anything. No one saw her. In that kitchen, skill was more important than anything else. When she made a faultless risotto for the first time, her teacher, a sharp-eyed woman who had been in the business for 30 years, clapped her on the back and exclaimed, "You've got fire in those hands." Zariah smiled. For real. She felt like people were finally seeing her for who she really was. Not just the girl who went viral or the waitress who got dragged across the floor, but the lady with goals, talent, and something to prove. People kept talking about her name outside of the institute. Things to read, podcasts, TV interviews. Everyone wanted to know what happened. Zariah, on the other hand, stayed focused. She didn't go after the sounds. She went after growth. Idris came once a month to check in, not as a benefactor, but as a teacher. He quietly watched her get better, continually telling her, "You don't owe anyone your trauma, but you may decide how it drives you." After 2 months, the local news called her the Magnolia Hero. Zariah, on the other hand, didn't care about titles. She was worried about the little black girl who was watching her narrative grow online, the one who was worried that her goals were too great for her area. She wanted to establish a future she could be proud of, one that wasn't based on pity but on hard work. She stopped for a moment while getting ready for a regional cooking competition and gazed around the test kitchen, which was full of whisks, flames, and the sound of ambition. And for the first time in her life, Zariah Lane didn't feel like she had to make herself smaller to fit in. There was someone in the room. Policy doesn't often lead to change. It begins with people. Idris Camden got that. That's why, just a few weeks after Zariah's tale made the news, he didn't merely write a check or tweet a hashtag. He started something substantial, something that would last. The project was called Equal Table. Its goal was brave, to do rid of racial bias in the restaurant business, not merely with words but also with procedures. It wasn't just about employing a few more black chefs or putting diversity slides in a business presentation. It wasn't enough to just cut off the branches. They had to change the roots. Equal Table offered training programs, internal audits, equality mentorships, and maybe most crucially, a way for hospitality workers who felt overlooked, silenced, or dismissed to report what happened without giving their names. Idris wanted to make sure that the next person didn't have to deal with Zariah's complaints. And it caught on fire. Famous restaurant chains joined in, food critics liked the work, even famous chefs spoke out in favor of the cause. But not everyone was happy. Some people in the industry said it was overreacting, while others said racism wasn't that bad anymore. Zariah heard everything. She read the comments, looked through the forums, and watched the interviews of people who were defending the old way of doing things, but she didn't move. She had lived it. And she knew that people didn't like true change, especially those who had gained by not talking. When Idris asked her to speak at the first national summit of Equal Table, she said yes. There were a lot of people in the ballroom. Everyone, from the press to professionals to students, was watching her. Zariah walked up to the stage in a simple black dress. Her voice was steady, and her eyes were steady. "I was never meant to get this far," she said. "I was told to be silent, keep servicing. I had to smile no matter how I was treated. But someone saw me, and I began to see myself." She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just expressed the truth about how she felt ignored, underestimated, and pushed to the edge by the system in 1,000 little ways. And when she was done, everyone in the room stood up. Not for show, not for show, but for a lady who turned wrongs into fuel and used it to illuminate the way for others. There was no trend for Equal Table. It was a change. And Zariah Lane was at the center of it. 3 years later, Zariah Lane was no longer a headline. It was part of a heritage. There was a cafe with warm yellow walls and a sign over the entrance that said Sunlit Lane on a quiet block in Atlanta. It was between a bookshop and a music store. No slogans, no fancy logos. Just a name, hers. There was a fragrance of cinnamon, cappuccino, and new hope within. The workforce was young, varied, and full of love. Everyone who worked there got a fair wage. The tips were put together and split up evenly. Once a week, they had open table night, where students from the area could come in, learn how to cook, and hear stories from chefs who looked like them, talked like them, and knew what it was like to dream while trying. Zariah walked around the cafe with a quiet purpose. She wasn't showy. She didn't have to be. Her presence said a lot. She taught. She was a teacher. She cleaned the counters and fixed the aprons. She didn't think leadership was about being better than anyone else. It was about helping the people next to you. She had a picture of her and Miss Eunice in front of the house they used to share behind the register. A handwritten quote is below it. "The world may not be fair. You can still make something lovely in it, though." People came from all over to eat her cooking, but they stayed for the energy, the sense that in this small area, dignity wasn't earned. It was accepted. Someone once asked Zariah during a panel what affected her life more, being humiliated or being visible. She took a break before answering. "Not either," she answered. "Choosing to move forward anyway transformed my life. When the spotlight went out, after the cameras were gone, I continued going, and it was the key. Because Zariah's narrative wasn't simply a black story at the end of the day. It was a narrative about people. Yes, of pain, but also of strength. of standing up for yourself when the world tries to ignore you. And maybe you aren't Zariah. You might not have gone through what she did. But think about this. Do you stay seated when you observe something unfair? Or do you stay? Thanks for viewing Hidden Worth, where we tell the stories that are hidden behind silence. If this story touched you, please share it, talk about it, and most importantly, remember it. Because of the next Zariah, she's already out there. And she's keeping an eye on things.